Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Politics Matters podcast. My name is Ryan Jakubowski, and I'm your host. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to all those who supported the launch of this podcast, and I also want to express my gratitude to those listening right now. So thank you all so much, and without further ado, I am very excited to get right into our first ever episode of the Politics Matters podcast. This week has produced a lot of pretty interesting news. We've got reports of an allegedly woke Republican in Alabama, which is just as crazy as it sounds, newly introduced congressional maps in Missouri and Ohio, a court overturning Maryland's map, and a very interesting special election state of Texas that will tell us a lot about the 2022 midterms. But before we get started with those topics, I do want to briefly discuss the confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, which is at this point extremely likely to happen after we got some news today when I'm recording this podcast. It'll hopefully be out either tomorrow or the day after, or should be Thursday or Friday. But Susan Collins announced today on Wednesday that she would be voting to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson, and this basically locks it up. I originally had like a full segment planned on this, but I didn't really want to do that again now that we've basically got confirmation that she will get confirmed, no pun intended. And so that brings us up to 50 guaranteed votes for Ketanji Brown Jackson, which is enough because in the event of a 50-50 tie, we would see Kamala Harris break the tie, and she would obviously vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation. And so, barring something crazy happening, I would not expect Ketanji Brown Jackson to get denied by the Senate. I don't see another Democrat voting to not confirm her, especially when you're throwing Collins there. It's rare to see Collins vote for something without unanimous support from the Democratic Party. And so the only Democrat that we'd have reason to be interested in that has yet to confirm their vote is Kyrsten Sinema. And Sinema has, I think I've heard that she's going to vote for it. She hasn't officially confirmed that or corroborated these claims for us. But we do have good reason to believe that she will vote to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson on April 4th, which is when the vote's going to be held. And so, yeah, and especially with Manchin Manchin already said yes last week. So with Manchin and Collins on board, I doubt Sinema votes against it. If she did, I think at that point there would be serious talk about whether she's actually a Democrat. And I don't even mean that as a joke. I think that people often go too far with saying that Sinema's not a Democrat. But if she wouldn't vote for a pretty qualified and like, I don't even say that as a Democrat. Like, yeah, I support Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation, but she's objectively qualified, and she objectively has the credentials needed for a Supreme Court nomination. And if Sinema voted against that, there would actually be a reason to talk about her being a Democrat, because I don't really know what else there would be. So, but anyways, Sinema, I don't expect to vote against Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation for a number of reasons. First, she, like, at this point, since it's confirmed, even if Sinema opposes her, it would basically be just like a protest vote, not really doing anything to actually affect the outcome. And it would also hurt her with Democrats. Like, Sinema's already quite unpopular with the Democratic Party. I know that. But she would lose any remaining support that she had prior to the vote. And for that reason, I would be very, very skeptical of anyone who says she's going to vote against Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation. But as I said earlier, we already have pretty legitimate reports that she's going to vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson. And so that leaves, the Democrats and Ketanji Brown Jackson at about 51 votes with Collins, Sinema, and Manchin. Now, the interesting thing here is that John Toon, who's a ranking Republican, said that Ketanji Brown Jackson will get a few Republican votes, but other than Collins, I'm not entirely sure where those votes would come from. And here's the thing. Like, I get we've got Collins on board, but Murkowski has a primary that is going to be very competitive, and one she's probably not favored in, against Shelley Chewbacca. The Alaska Republican Party has endorsed against Murkowski, and Donald Trump has been a vocal supporter of her opponent, Chewbacca. Murkowski's already got it pretty tough right now. I don't think that she'd want to hurt herself more by voting for a Democratic appointed Supreme Court Justice nominee state as red as Alaska. So if Murkowski wants to have any hope of winning that primary, I don't think that she'd vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson. But, yeah. And then Sass and Romney would be the other two you'd maybe look at for a moderate swing GOP vote. But, like, at the end of the day, it's not entirely likely that either of them vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson, because Romney is, at least I think, not really a moderate. I know he gets called a moderate by a lot of people, but he got the reputation in 2020 when he was the only Republican to break and vote to convict Trump on those charges where he called Vladimir Zelensky and asked him to give him information on Joe Biden and threatened to withhold military aid. Obviously, that did not age poorly at all. But yeah, and so he did not get convicted by the Senate on that. It was a GOP Senate. It was obviously wasn't going to get convicted. And the Republican Party, I guess, won that hearing. In 2021, after he was tied to the Capitol insurrection, a bunch of Republicans voted to convict him, including Romney. And that's really where Romney's reputation as a moderate comes from, right? But in terms of actual policy and in terms of the stuff he votes for in the Senate, he's not too much different from a generic Republican, to be completely honest with you. So I'd be surprised if Romney votes for Ketanji Brown Jackson. He might do it just to, look bipartisan, just to get the aesthetic, say, look, guys, I'm being bipartisan, American unity or whatever. But I don't think he will. And then the other one I mentioned was Ben Sasse, but Sasse actually earlier this week corroborated that he would not be voting for Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I'll actually quote him because I think this is kind of weird. So he said that, quote, Ketanji Brown Jackson has impeccable credentials, a deep knowledge of the law, and is an extraordinary person with an extraordinary American story. But unfortunately, I still cannot vote for her. That basically means that he's okay with her as a person, as a justice, but he's not willing to put his political career in Nebraska on the line to, vote for her, even if he doesn't really mind her. He's got a primary this year as well. Him and Trump have beef. It's not going to be easy for Sasse to begin with in that primary with Trump hell-bent on beating him. He doesn't want to make it any easier for his opponents who want to replace him with a more, right-wing Republican in Nebraska. So yeah, at this point, it's quite likely that we see at least 51 votes for Ketanji Brown Jackson. Murkowski and Romney might break, and they might vote with the Democrats, but we don't really know. If I had to bet, I wouldn't say so. I'd expect it to be 51-49 in favor of Ketanji Brown Jackson. And by the way, actually, I will take a victory lap on this. I did actually write the script, or not the script, but I wrote the outline for this podcast. And this was before Colin said that she'd vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson. I actually still had Colin as the only Republican voting for Ketanji Brown Jackson. So if I had been able to release this episode earlier, I would have actually gotten that right. So, yay, I'm glad I get to toot my own horn for that. But yeah, just needed to capitalize on that opportunity I presented myself. Anyways, we're going to get into our next segment, which is the pretty chaotic Alabama Senate race at this point, where we've got Trump loyalist Mo Brooks being unendorsed by Donald Trump for becoming woke. And yes, I'm aware the word woke has become kind of a buzzword thrown around by conservatives to describe someone they don't like. That being said, I think there's some sort of definition that Donald Trump was using when he described Mo Brooks as woke, which was, I guess, kind of joining the radical, and when I say radical left, I'm obviously paraphrasing, joining the radical left in not wanting to overturn the 2020 election that happened over a year and a half ago. And so it's pretty crazy to think that Mo Brooks, who is like the opposite of woke, again, I know woke doesn't really have a ton of meaning, it never has, but like when you think of woke, Mo Brooks is not what comes to mind. So I'll literally read off his policy positions to you. He is against funding Planned Parenthood. He accused the Democrats of starting a war on white people, and was one of just 14 House Republicans to vote against making Juneteenth a federal holiday. So again, even if woke were to somehow become a word that had a concrete meaning, I do not think Brooks would fall under that umbrella. And so that's why the claim is so bizarre. And Mo Brooks' crime here is not being able to magically make Donald Trump president. I will read what happened out loud to you, and I will let you be the judge of whether this makes someone woke. Brooks said, and I quote, President Trump asked me to rescind the 2020 elections, immediately remove Joe Biden from the White House, immediately put President Trump back in the White House, hold new special election for the presidency. So in case you didn't detect that, I was actually chuckling a little bit as I read that. And I'm sorry, I had to read this out loud like 10 times before I stopped finding it immensely funny. Like the first time I read this quote on Twitter, I like burst out laughing and was like, what? Yeah, you can look it up yourself. That's what Brooks claims Trump said to him. And I'm not a big Mo Brooks or Donald Trump fan, for those of you who don't know. But I certainly, if Trump did say that, I hope he was joking, but clearly not, because he unendorsed Mo Brooks and is likely causing Brooks' Senate candidacy to implode for not being able to magically hold a special election for the presidency. And by the way, Brooks has no power to do this. He's a sitting member of Congress. He's not even on a position of power to think about doing this. He's not obscure, but he's not super relevant either. Like, he's a congressman from a safe Republican seat in northern Alabama. He's not going to be on the news 24/7 the way you see someone like Nancy Pelosi or AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene even. So he's not as relevant or in a position of power as other Republicans or Democrats in the House. And so that's why this claim is so bizarre, because I think Trump knows Mo Brooks can't magically hold a special election for the presidency. Even if Trump thinks the election was stolen, and even if Mo Brooks thinks that, it's just not possible, right? Like, it's just, at that point, you might as well ask me to hold a special election for the presidency, which would be bizarre. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff going on with Mo Brooks and Donald Trump, and it screwed over Brooks this time, because Brooks and Trump had a pretty good relationship, at least I thought, until this happened, where, Brooks had been a big Trump guy. He was very much in favor of Donald Trump. He was very much in favor of all of Donald Trump's policies, and, he campaigned on Trump, and when he got the Trump endorsement, he was all about Trump. His Twitter handle was Mo Brooks endorsed by President Trump, ! So he was very much relying almost on Trump to get that victory he needed in this Alabama Republican primary. And so without Trump's endorsement, where does his candidacy go? It's very, very difficult to imagine Brooks winning at this point, because he was already in third place with the Trump endorsement. Now without it, it's going to be really hard for him. So the people that he's behind right now are Mike Durant and Katie Britt. The latest poll had Durant at 35% in the lead, followed by Katie Britt at 28%, and then Mo Brooks in a distant third with just 16%. And this is not good news for Mo Brooks at all. This was, I think, before, or at least, right as the Trump endorsement was rescinded. And, I get that the Donald Trump endorsement isn't all-powerful. It's pretty dang powerful in the Republican primary, but it's not, all-powerful. It probably has, a 90-95% success rate, so it occasionally will falter, but in Alabama, you'd expect it to be, Trump country. And so, with Brooks already in third place, failing to, galvanize the base in any way, now that he's lost that, the whole thing he was building his campaign around, he's done. I don't see a path forward for Mo Brooks. I don't think he'll drop out, but I don't see a path forward for Mo Brooks at this point. I just cannot see him coming back, especially after all that's happened. The Trump people probably aren't going to like him if they believe what Trump said about him, and the more moderate Republicans he's already pushed that side of the base away. They're already for Britt or Durant, and so I think Brooks is gone. I would be surprised if he gets even 10-15% of the vote in that primary. So you may be having a bad week, but if it makes you feel any better, Mo Brooks is definitely having a worse one. So that leaves Durant and Britt, who are going to duke it out to see who can get the Trump endorsement. If I had to guess, it's probably Katie Britt. And it's not because she's the ideal Trump person, but I'm mostly saying this because Katie Britt is the least risky pick for Trump. And after his Mo Brooks thing kind of imploded, I would think that Trump would want to stick with the safe option. Again, he's Donald Trump. He's one of the less predictable people in our current political culture, but I would assume that he's going to go with Britt here. And again, Durant has a decent candidacy for the Trump endorsement on the surface. He's running a pretty Trumpy campaign. But when you dig deeper, it's not really great for him. I get that he had to lead in the latest poll, but he has a big scandal that I'm not going to get into. I'm not even going to mention it because I don't want to get demonetized on YouTube, and I also don't want to get into it. But he has a big scandal. You can look it up yourself if you want. And he also is not receiving really any endorsement. If you just read the Wikipedia page for the Senate race, Brooks and Britt both had their fair share of endorsements, right? Durant, despite having a good, pretty good numbers in the polling that we've seen, does not have any key endorsements the way Brooks or Britt did. And so that makes me think that a lot of people know something about Durant that we don't. His campaign might be headed down the Brooks route, or that he's, this scandal's going to really harm him. And so I don't think Trump's going to want to associate with him in the future. I could be wrong. I don't live in the head of Donald Trump, but it's not at this point likely to me that happens. So that leaves Britt. She's not ideal for Trump, but she has the key endorsements. She has endorsements from Senators Ernst, Moore, Capito, Graham, Fisher, as well as the current Fisher, as well as the senator who currently holds the seat, who is Republican Richard Shelby. And Britt's been a long-time Republican. She worked for Richard Shelby. She's been in Republican campaigns. And so I think that if Trump wants to play it safe, for this race, he'll probably endorse Britt and let her win the race, especially if she takes that lead that I've been saying she'll take for the past 2 months. I read up on the data for this race back in January, and I said I would be surprised if Britt doesn't take the lead by summer. I stand by that, especially with Brooks likely imploding. So Katie Britt, I do believe, will take the polling lead, and I think that if she does start to gain momentum, that'll be it for Trump to endorse her. And so at that point, I would say Britt's the favorite to win this Senate race. Again, we're still a few months away from that. Durant, if Durant really builds up a lead in the polling, if Brooks supporters flock to Durant, that could be really interesting to see how that plays out. But for now, I will stick with my Katie. Britt prediction. It's pretty crazy. I just thought I'd mention that because it's not, it's not an election per se, but it's pretty crazy that we saw Mo Brooks, who was one of the biggest Trump people in the world, get unendorsed last week because he did not magically call a special election for the presidency. Just absolutely bonkers stuff. But anyways, we're going to move on to our election coverage of the podcast, which is the Texas 34th District election, where Democrats are in for a very, very telling race, and it's either going to be very good for them or very bad for them. So, on March 22nd, incumbent Democrat Fiamon Vea announced that he would be stepping down to take a job in the private sector, and this is very inconvenient for Democrats, as Vea occupied a seat that Joe Biden only won by 4%, and due to recent Democratic struggles with Hispanics, the seat could very well flip this year. And I just want to clarify, I'm sure some of you already know this, but this seat is going to become a Biden plus 15 in November, because it was redistricted to become bluer. And in November, it'll be much more Democratic than it is now. But for now, this election will be held in a seat that's Biden plus 4. So it's still going to be a competitive, just in case you weren't sure about that. But I just wanted to clarify, because I just needed to clarify that before I did this podcast, because I did not want to have the wrong number. But yeah, so for now, it's a Biden plus 4 seat until November. This election's likely to be held in either June or July, maybe August if things get a little delayed, but it's going to be held in the summer. We know that. And the numbers that we're going to get here are probably going to be not very high in terms of turnout. And when I say numbers, I generally mean turnout. It's not going to be very high, especially for the Democratic Party, because Democrats in the seat have relied on Hispanics to come out and vote for them. And that worked well for Vea. He didn't have any special elections to deal with, obviously. And now that we've got a special election in a year that's not great for Democrats, where Hispanics are turning against, so this is just the recipe for straight-up disaster. And the Rio Grande Valley, which is where the seat is located, has also gotten a lot redder in recent years. This district itself went from Clinton plus 21 to O'Rourke plus 16, which is very eerie considering how Beto overperformed Clinton statewide by 7, yet did worse in this district. So it signaled a very clear trend at that point, but no one really pointed out because Beto, was doing so well everywhere else that people kind of forgot about it. And the seat went to Biden plus 4, and then people were like, this seat's it's getting a little tricky for Democrats. And so that kind of puts the Democrats in a spot where they need to start to invest in these races, because they're used to winning these races easily. Because this is a seat that's 84% Hispanic. It is, generally speaking, very Democratic. Vea has won re-election by double digits every year. And so, Democrats have been used to just taking the seat as one of the safe ones, and now it's different. Now it's just a seat that is going to be competitive, and it's going to be quite a tough battle for the Democrats if they want to hold on to this seat. So the reason that the seat is bad for Democrats, especially right now, it's a few things, but one of the critical ones is that the Democrats have a fundamental recruiting problem in this district. So in case you don't know, the guy who's going to be running for the Democrats in November is going to be Vicente Gonzalez. And Gonzalez was in the 15th district, which is right next door. And he was winning that, but it was pretty close. And it was a little too close for comfort, right? And so the GOP redistricted it to make it a Trump seat. And so at that point, he was like, I'm out, and he decided to run in this district, or he will be in November anyways. And that puts him in a seat that's going to be a Biden plus 15, so he'll probably win it. It's likely that he'll win it in the in November. And so that means that, assuming he wins in November, which I think everyone is, whoever wins this seat will only be able to hold it for 5-6 months. So it's basically just a seat on rent. It's like, okay, you can run, and if you win, congrats, you get to hold it for 2 seconds. And that's why, especially if you're a Democrat who's going to have to not be the nominee in November, you don't want to run, especially because you might be putting your political career in jeopardy by losing this seat. Now, the Republicans are going to be in for a tough one in November, but they can galvanize the base by, winning the seat for a few months, then handing it back to the Democrats and saying, look, we got something done in the Rio Grande Valley. And the Republicans already have a good candidate in Mayra Flores, who is running a pretty good campaign, I would say. She's kind of branding herself as a typical Republican Hispanic, but what she's good at least I think, is potentially being able to get that crossover from Democrats who are Hispanic. And so that's critical in a seat like this that's literally 84% Hispanic, where Hispanics do make up the vast majority of the electorate. So if the Republicans can continue to make inroads with Hispanics, this seat could very well flip to them. Now, when I say continue to make inroads, I just want to clarify that the Republican Party has been rapidly improving with Hispanics, especially in South Texas, over the past few years. And I want to read you some numbers from Vea's re-election bids, dating back to 2014, which was the first year he ran for re-election, about how well he did relative to the country as a whole. And when we say relative to the country as a whole, it's not how well he did, like the number he won re-election by, it's how well he did relative to the national environment. So if the environment was even, meaning that the Democrats and Republicans both got the same percentage of the vote, it would be whatever number he won by. So if he won by 20, in the environment would just be 20, easy, right? it gets a little trickier. So let's say the Republican Party won the national environment by 5%, and he won by 20. He would have overperformed the national environment by 25% as a Democrat. If the Democrats won it by 5%, he would have overperformed by 15% because it's a D plus 5 environment. He won by D plus 20. The difference is, D plus 15. So that's kind of the general gist of things. I hope you understand that. I hope I did a good job explaining that. But the point is, 2014, he did 28% better than the national environment for Democrats. In 2016, he did 26% better. Then in 2018, he did 12% better. And in 2020, he did 10% better. That's a pretty darn big shift between 2016 and 2018. It was a 14% swing to the right in the district relative to the country. And that, it didn't really seem like much because he still won re-election by, 19% or 20% in 2018? But he still did not do that well, especially considering in 2016 he did better than he did in 2018, considering the fact that 2016 was a much worse year for Democrats than 2018 was. And so this didn't get attention, again, because it was still a victory. It was still a pretty convincing one at that. But there was still a trend there that was, I think, indeed concerning for Democrats. And so in 2020, Biden only wins the district by 4. Vea only wins the district. When I say only, it's still pretty good. He wins it by 13. And now we're at the point where we're seeing a special election in a district that's been rapidly trending right. And the Republicans are, say, favored to win this race. I didn't think that I'd be saying this even, 2 years ago. But a seat in the Rio Grande Valley is now going to be Republican. I say that right now. I don't necessarily want that to happen, but I'm trying, this podcast itself, the content that you're going to get in this podcast, me saying I'm a Democrat sometimes, I get that. But what you're going to get also is unbiased election predictions, meaning that even if I don't like the result I'm going to get, I'm still going to give you what I think is going to happen, because I can talk as much as I want, but I want my election predictions to be as accurate as possible. In this race, I do see the GOP favored. So maybe the GOP have about a 60% chance of winning this race. But again, we don't know enough about this race to make an actual concrete projection because we don't have any polling. We don't really have any candidate data for the Democratic Party. And so that is why I will just say that the Republicans are favored, but I do not know by how much. Overall, Vea stepping down for now is very inconvenient for Democrats. They'll probably win the seat back in November, but I do not think that they're going to win it in this election this summer because things are getting dicey for them. Things are going to be very, very difficult for the Democrats in South Texas for the near future. And until they can fix that fundamental problem, I do not see them winning this seat back or doing well here. So I think there are 3 scenarios that might play out here. One is good for Republicans, one's good for Democrats, one's kind of in the middle, but I guess kind of good for Democrats. So the one that's really good for Democrats is the one where they have a miracle and do a Vea-type margin, which would be, winning by 10, winning by 13 or 15. And that would be crucial for Democrats because it would basically say the problem that we had with Hispanics was a Biden problem, and we're going to start, getting okay numbers, right? That would be great for Democrats, and I think they'd be popping the courts if that happens. I think it has a 10% chance of happening though, so don't, if you're a Democrat, don't get your hopes up. The more likely scenario, I think, is that Democrats narrowly, eke it out, win by 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, which is the Biden number. And they can say, okay, we're not going to be imploding too much in November, but we still have this fundamental problem. It still exists, but it's not going to make us lose drastically in 2022 as we might have been thinking. So it's, okay, could be worse. Then we start discussing the potential of the Republicans winning the seat and winning it, by 1, maybe 2, maybe, up to 5, maybe even 7. I've heard projections have had them winning it by 6 or 7, which have been, I'd say, the most outlandish. And so if that were to happen, which I think is going to happen, I think the GOP is going to win by 4 to 5. That would be, I think, a very good reason for Democrats to press the panic button and say, we are screwed unless we do something to change this, and unless we can fundamentally fix the turnout and polarization problems we have in South Texas, we are done, and we're losing many seats in the House, including seats we thought were going to win, New Mexico too, and even Cuellar's district, even maybe to talk about districts in Arizona that they might have thought they had, the district that Greg Stanton's in, that they thought they'd be winning. But at that point, Democrats have a much bigger problem on their hands. And so, for now, I think the Republicans are going to win the seat by 4 or 5. The Democrats are going to panic, but I could be wrong. Again, stay posted. I'll update you on the podcast as well as on my Twitter account, YouTube channel. I should actually pump those right now. My YouTube channel is called Unbiased Election Predictions and History. I cover, obviously, elections and also history on that channel if you want to get a dose of both in your life. Twitter, I'm at Ryan Jakubowski, just that. My last name is spelled Jakubowski. So you can follow me on both those platforms. But that being said, I think we should get to our next thing, which is the maps in Missouri and Ohio. And so we're just going to knock these out. I want to kind of get through this. I want to condense as much as possible because I could talk about this for as long as I want, but I want to make this somewhat digestible. So, Missouri is the first time we'll get into because it's definitely way simpler than Ohio. So, at first, it looked like Democrats were going to get a very good map out of Missouri with 2 safe seats, one being in Kansas City and the other being in St. Louis, so, the typical 2. And then a seat that would be competitive in 2024, which would be Ann Wagner's seat, which was going to be Trump barely winning it. And it was going to be suburban St. Louis, and it would have had Wagner be in a seat that was narrowly favorable to her in 2022. She probably would have won it by single digits. And then 2024, she would have probably lost it, if I had to be honest. But that did not happen. There was a lot of talk from Republicans about saving Ann Wagner, and they decided, we're going to draw a safer map. And so they put Ann Wagner in a seat that is safe Republican. So at this point, it's basically locked in that the map will have 2 safe Democratic districts, 2 safe Republican districts, and that there will be no competitive seats on the map this year, unlike 2020 where we did see a competitive seat in suburban St. Louis. Again, just to briefly address this, back last year, this is a while ago, but last year there was a talk of drawing out Emanuel Cleaver, who was the Democrat from Kansas City, because his district was not protected by the Voting Rights Act, but the Republicans didn't do it because they wanted to, just make a very safe map, and Cleaver and Cori Bush will likely survive. So that's Missouri for you. Pretty simple, nothing to it. 2 very safe Democratic seats, 6 very safe Republican seats. That is all. Now, Ohio, on the other hand, has been much more problematic. We have had jail threats. We've had a number of legal battles that I could not count, and it's been crazy. So we've had a half-a-year-long saga of the Ohio Supreme Court overturning the gerrymandered maps proposed by the Republican-controlled legislature, and then having the legislature promptly just ignore those orders. And there were even threats for Republican legislators that they'd be arrested if they did not ungerrymander their map. That's how crazy it was. And so we finally, after months of this complete and utter chaos, it looks like we finally have an end to this saga, where we've got a pretty Republican favorable map that is likely going to produce a pretty slanted effect towards the GOP in 2022, but could get interesting in the future. So we've got 2 safe Democratic seats in, you guessed it, Cleveland and Columbus. We've got some safe Republican seats. I think that the number would be 10 if you made me pin it. Maybe 9 if things get interesting, but I'll say 9 to 10 is pretty safe seats for the Republicans. And then we've got 3 or 4 competitive seats. So the most competitive seat in my eyes is the first district, which is the city of Cincinnati itself, and then it's awful. The district is... It's like a flagpole with flags at both the top and the bottom, if you can imagine that, right? The bottom flag is Cincinnati, and then it stretches up, just thinly stretches up, and then the top flag would be the very red county of Warren County, which is trending blue a little bit, but is still pretty red. And so, in the future, I think this seat's going to get pretty good for Democrats, especially the trends in Warren County, but for right now, it's a toss-up. I think the Republicans are narrowly favored because they drew the seat very strategically. They cut out the major blue trending areas outside of Cincinnati, like the suburbs, and I think Greene or Montgomery County, I'm forgetting which one, but they did cut out those suburbs, and they put them in another safe red district. And so most of the Cincinnati suburbs that were getting blue are on another seat, which means that this district is trending bluer a little slower than you'd expect. And so that's bad for Democrats because this seat will be hyper-competitive in 2022. And they've put the incumbent Republican Steve Cabot in a position where he can win re-election. It'll be close for sure. It'll probably be by under 2% either way. But the trends here just aren't fast enough for Democrats because of the way the district is formed. And so it's a toss-up in my book. It could go either way, like I said. If you made me guess, I'd say Cabot wins re-election as a Republican, but it's really a pure toss-up, and I'll probably change that rating once I get more data out of this race. By the summer, we'll have a much better idea than now. Because really, right now, we're only really getting into election season. It's still just barely into spring of 2022, right? So we still have a ways to go, but yeah. So anyways, Ohio 1st District, Cincinnati, and a part of Warren County. And then another competitive district is the 9th District, which is a Trump plus 3 seat in northern Ohio that is comprised of deep red rural areas and then the deep blue city of Toledo. I'm rating as likely Republican, and I'm only mentioning this because Marcy Kopter could make this race get interesting. Kopter is the incumbent Democrat, and she is an overperformer. She overperformed by 6 in 2020, meaning that if she overperforms by 6 again, she'll win re-election. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that her seat's going to become redder due to the trends in her seat. Her district is red trending, and she's likely going to lose re-election, but I just mentioned her because she's an open performer, because if she really, really does this right, she could be in for a good race. Then Ohio 13 is a Biden plus 3 seat that starts in the South Cleveland suburbs, treks past Akron, and stops at Canton, so it's kind of, it has 3 blue spots, and then sprinkled between that are red rural areas, or red exurbs, I guess I should say. And so, I'm rating it as a lean Republican seat, because I do think that the performance here will be big enough for Republicans, but I wouldn't be shocked if it goes into toss-up territory, because this seat has some interesting trends that could surprise in 2022. But for now, I do have the Republican Party favored. So those are our competitive districts. There are 3 honorable mentions here, which are Ohio 7, Ohio 10, and Ohio 15, because they're all single-digit Trump seats, meaning that they all voted for Trump by under 10% in 2020. But in 2022, because the environment's so bad for Democrats, they're probably going to slide into the radar and be fairly safe. But in 2024 and the future, they could get interesting. Of these 3, I think the most interesting long-term is the 10th district, because it contains the Democratic trending suburbs of Cincinnati and the city of Dayton, meaning that it can, if Dayton and Cincinnati continue to go the way they're going, which I actually wrote about on my Substack, which you can go check out, by the way, uepyt.substack.com. Just go to that direct address and it'll take you right to my Substack. Go read my article about how Cincinnati and Dayton are the next big things for Democrats. Just had to throw that in there. But, yeah, this seat, if things really get, if they do become the next big thing for Democrats, this seat could very well flip in 2026, because it's only Trump plus 3, and Trump did okay in Dayton. He didn't do well, but considering the trends, he did okay in Dayton. And so I think that once those trends that Trump got start to evaporate and the Democratic trends fully set in, then we're going to get into a scenario where we are saying, look, this seat is very competitive. The Democrats are in a good position to win both this and the Cincinnati seat, and I think that we could, by 2026, see 2 Democratic seats in Southern Ohio, which would be interesting to see. Now, the final map that we have to look at and talk about is Maryland. So Maryland's original map has 7 safe Democratic seats, and then 1 competitive district that would have been probably won by Andy Harris in 2022. He's the Republican. But it would have been interesting long-term, so that's why Democrats drew it to, make this seat competitive long-term. And that plan looked good for Democrats for a while, until it got overturned by a state judge, who ruled that it was an unconstitutional map because it was a partisan gerrymander. Democrats did not get their map through, so they had to draw a less blatantly gerrymandered one. It's still pretty favorable to them. They've still got 6 safe seats. They had to draw Andy Harris into a safe Republican seat because they couldn't have made his district competitive because it would have been a gerrymander. So they put him into a Trump plus 17 seat. And then the last seat is, I think, Biden plus 10. And it's lean Democratic for now. I do think the Democrats are going to win it, but it could get interesting because Clinton only won by 1%. And if things get really bad for Democrats in Western Maryland and something crazy happens, I think we could see that district flipping. But for now, I'm rating as lean Democratic. Could get interesting long-term, though. So that's it for Maryland. It doesn't change the partisanship of the state, but it makes the number of safe seats for Democrats go down by 1. It was 7, and then now it's 6. So they're going to have to invest in that seat a little more, but I still think they'll win it. So with that, I am done with the first ever episode of the Politics Matters podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a comment. You can reach out to me in any way you want. I've got my Twitter linked. You can comment on my YouTube channel. You can do whatever you want. Just let me know what you think of the show. Again, this is a learning experience for me too. This is the first ever episode. So if you got something you want to see change or you like suggestions, feel free to DM me. Feel free to let me know what you think. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. I will see you next week.